I never thought a single phrase could dominate someone's life for an entire month, but somehow, "not today," became the rhythm of my days. It started innocuously enough, on a Wednesday morning when I tried to talk to Emily about what had been lingering between us. I had hoped for some clarity, some honesty, maybe even a small gesture that could remind me why we had chosen each other. Instead, she looked at me with that faint, distant smile and simply said, "Not today." First, I laughed it off. I told myself everyone has bad mornings, that she was busy, distracted, or stressed. But then it became a pattern. I tried again the next day over coffee, while she shuffled around the kitchen making breakfast. "Emily," I asked gently, "can we talk about us?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, a subtle sign of recognition, and then she whispered, almost mockingly, "Not today." By the third day, my patience was thinning. I couldn't understand how someone I had trusted, someone I had built a life with, could brush aside my attempts at communication so casually. I spent the morning pacing around our apartment, clutching the mug she had insisted I take, the one with the chipped handle she claimed made it quaint. Every time I lifted it, I imagined the conversation I wanted to have, each imagined word tumbling into silence when I remembered her phrase, "Not today." Week 1 bled into week 2. I began to notice the small shifts around me, subtle changes in Emily's behavior that I had ignored for months. The way she lingered on her phone longer than usual, the brief but deliberate avoidance of eye contact when I entered the room, the way she smiled at strangers with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. I tried to confront her once, gently probing, "Are you hiding something?" She only shook her head and repeated the phrase, this time with a sharper edge, "Not today." By the end of the second week, the tension in our apartment was almost palpable. Our conversations, once easy and filled with teasing and laughter, had turned into a minefield. Every question I asked, every attempt to reach her was met with that same barricade. "Not today" wasn't just a phrase anymore. It had become a shield, a weapon even, and I didn't know how to breach it. I tried rationalizing, as one does when the heart wants to cling to hope. Maybe she was stressed at work, I told myself. Maybe she was tired of me asking questions. Maybe she didn't realize how much I needed her honesty. But the gnawing in my gut refused to let me ignore it. Week 3 arrived, and with it, a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in years. Something was shifting beneath the surface of our relationship, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I began observing her more closely, not out of suspicion at first, but because I couldn't help myself. Every laugh, every glance, every half-finished sentence became a clue, a fragment of a larger picture I couldn't yet see. She seemed distant, her smiles often fleeting, her laughter sometimes hollow, and always, when I tried to catch her in a moment of vulnerability, she met my eyes and said, "Not today." By day 20, the repetition had taken a toll. I found myself talking to friends in hushed tones, looking for advice without revealing the specifics, afraid that even mentioning the phrase out loud would somehow validate it. "It's like she's intentionally pushing me away," I told my best friend, Mark, over beers one Friday night. Mark shook his head slowly, his brow furrowed. "You've got to confront it," he said. "You can't let her dodge for a month straight. That's not normal." The 4th week arrived, and with it, a strange mix of anger and anticipation. I tried planning conversations, rehearsing questions in my head while driving to work or walking through the park. I imagined what I would say, how I would react if she admitted to something serious, how I would respond if she confessed that the distance wasn't just emotional but something tangible, something I had feared but never wanted to acknowledge. Yet every attempt in reality ended the same. I would open my mouth, take a deep breath, and hear her voice whisper, "Not today." And then came day 31. I had begun to brace myself for some sort of breakthrough, a confrontation that might finally give me clarity or force a resolution. The morning started like any other. She moved around the apartment quietly, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm I had been carrying for the past 30 days. I could feel my pulse quicken, the tension in my chest tightening with every step she took toward me. Finally, in the late afternoon, she approached me, her expression softer than I had seen in weeks. Her voice, when she spoke, was tentative. Let's talk?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. In that moment, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity sharpened by the weeks of avoidance and unanswered questions. I looked at her, the words I had been rehearsing suddenly unnecessary. I smiled faintly and said, almost ceremoniously, "Not today." The pause that followed was thick, almost audible, as she blinked, trying to gauge the weight of my response. I felt a strange power in those words, a reclaiming of myself, a boundary firmly placed after 31 days of being ignored, pushed aside, and forced to confront the silence. And in that brief exchange, I realized that sometimes the most profound statements are not those that beg for answers, but those that assert control over one's own peace. Her eyes widened, a flicker of shock passing over her face, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability I had longed for weeks but never received. Emily's lips parted as if to protest, to explain, to plead, but I held up a hand, not out of anger, but as a quiet signal that this was not the moment for discussion. "Not today," I repeated, softer this time, but just as firm. She sank into the armchair across from me, her shoulders slumping, a sigh escaping her lips. For the first time in over a month, she looked small, human, fallible, and I realized that the phrase she had wielded like a shield had been a mask for her own confusion. The Emily I knew, the one who laughed at bad puns, who always left a note on the fridge, who made our apartment feel like home, was buried beneath layers of uncertainty, fear, and perhaps guilt. I poured myself a glass of water, keeping my voice even as I spoke. 31 days, I said, counting silently with my fingers. 31 days of not today. Not today to talk, not today to explain, not today to care about what this is doing to us. My words hung in the air, heavy but precise. I needed honesty. I needed clarity. And I got silence instead. Emily didn't respond at first, and I could see the weight of those words settling in her chest. She opened her mouth, closed it, and finally whispered, I just didn't know how to start. I was afraid." Her voice trailed off, a soft tremor betraying the anxiety I had sensed all along. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in, but I didn't soften. The lesson of the past month had been harsh but illuminating. Silence, no matter how polite or casual, is still a choice. And by repeatedly choosing avoidance, she had allowed the distance between us to grow into a canyon. I realized then that my own patience had limits, that respect for oneself and one's emotions cannot be indefinitely postponed in the name of fear or comfort. "You had a choice every day," I said quietly. "You could have said, yes, we can talk. You could have tried to meet me halfway, but you didn't. And that's why today I say again, not today." Her eyes filled with tears, a mixture of regret and frustration. I could hear the shaky inhale of her breath, feel the tremor in her hands as she folded them in her lap. She tried to speak again, but this time I simply shook my head, giving her a chance to process without interruption. For 31 days, I had listened, I had waited, I had imagined conversations, explanations, even apologies that never came. Now I needed the silence to claim my own closure. Minutes passed. She cried softly, the sound barely audible. Yet each sob was a release, a subtle acknowledgement of the weight she had carried and the walls she had erected. I sipped my water again, calm and observant, understanding that sometimes witnessing another's reckoning is enough. It isn't about punishment or vindication. It's about the truth finally being confronted. Eventually, Emily leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, hands clasped together. Her voice came out fragile, almost childlike. "I don't want to lose you. I was scared. I thought avoiding this would keep things safe." I allowed a faint smile, tinged with both compassion and sadness, to cross my face. "Sometimes the safest path is not the one that avoids conflict," I said. "It's the one that faces it head-on." But the moment has passed, Emily. 31 days is a long time to wait for courage that only arrives too late. We sat in silence after that, the weight of weeks unspoken now hanging between us in a different shape, one less oppressive, more reflective. I realized that my response, simple though it seemed, had given both of us a measure of clarity. She understood my boundaries. I understood her fear. But clarity doesn't always equal reconciliation. Sometimes it simply lays the groundwork for understanding, for moving forward in whatever form that might take. Finally, I stood, setting my glass down on the counter. "We'll talk another day," I said softly, the last echo of my own patience and restraint. Not today is not forever, but for now, it is enough. Emily nodded, the tears still glistening in her eyes, and I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights flickering in the distance. 31 days of anticipation, frustration, and silent pleading had culminated in this quiet moment of mutual recognition. The storm had passed, but the aftermath remained, and I understood something crucial. Sometimes love is not about forcing resolution, not about immediate answers, but about giving space for truth and boundaries to coexist. I glanced back at her one last time. She was still seated there, small, vulnerable, human, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not even relief, but a strange, unshakable calm. The phrase that had once held so much power over me now felt balanced, almost neutral. Not today, I whispered to myself, a final acknowledgement of the journey, a quiet reclaiming of control, and a tentative step toward whatever came next.